Hello, everyone. Have you ever wondered how one small act of kindness could change an entire life? Meet Liam, an 18-year-old construction worker who spent all his savings to help two strangers and sparked a chain of events that transformed his entire world. What's the kindest thing you've ever done? Share it below. Now, let's dive into today's story. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson. Liam, an 18-year-old construction worker, trudged down a dusty path after another grueling day at the site. His boots were caked with mud, his shirt damp with sweat, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. Every step closer to home brought a bittersweet longing, yet it always felt like a drop in the ocean of needs he and his sick mother Grace faced. Liam's hands bore the rough calluses of his trade, a testament to his determination. Each swing of the hammer and lift of a heavy beam was driven by the thought of Grace, whose frail body had been confined to their small home for months. Her soft voice, laced with exhaustion but never devoid of love, was the only thing that kept Liam going. Her illness, undiagnosed due to lack of funds, had tightened its grip on their lives. Despite their hardships, Grace never let despair color their bond. As Liam approached their worn-out house, the sight of the crooked porch and peeling paint greeted him, a reflection of their struggles, but also of the love and care that held it together. Inside, Grace waited in her usual spot by the window, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. She smiled when she saw him, her face lighting up with the warmth only a mother could muster after a long, trying day. "Evening, Liam," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her condition. "How was work?" "Hard, but nothing I can't handle," he replied, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling today, Ma?" Grace shook her head, deflecting his concern. "I'm just glad you're home. That's enough for me." Liam's chest tightened. He wished he could do more than bring her simple meals and words of comfort. Tonight, he had a small plan, one that involved a little indulgence. For weeks, he'd been putting aside a few dollars from his meager earnings. Tonight, he would use them to buy Grace a proper meal, something fresh, hearty, and nourishing. The thought of bringing her bread that wasn't stale, meat that wasn't from a can, or even a piece of fruit brought a faint smile to his lips. After a quick wash and change of clothes, Liam set off toward the diner in town, his stomach rumbling but his resolve unwavering. The streets glistened with remnants of a light drizzle, and the evening air carried the aroma of fried food and baked goods. Passing the bright neon sign of Rick's Diner, Liam could already imagine the meal he'd carry back to Grace. But as he pushed open the door, the warm hum of the diner was shattered by raised voices. The scene inside brought him to an abrupt halt. At the center of the commotion stood an elderly couple, their worn clothes and hunched posture betraying their hardship. William and Margaret, as the owner Rick loudly addressed them, looked terrified as they faced the ire of the burly man behind the counter. "You think this is a charity?" Rick bellowed, his face red with anger. "No money, no meal. Get out of my diner." William stammered, his voice trembling. "Please, we didn't mean to. We thought we had enough." Margaret clutched her husband's arm, her eyes brimming with tears. The remnants of their meal lay scattered across their table, doused with the soup Rick had flung in disgust. The humiliation was palpable, and the other diners averted their gazes, unwilling to intervene. Liam's fists clenched at his sides. He felt the sting of their shame as if it were his own. He glanced down at the money in his pocket, just enough for Grace's meal. A lump formed in his throat as he weighed his options. The image of his mother waiting at home flashed through his mind, but so did the helpless faces of the elderly couple. He stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "I'll pay their bill." "How much is it?" Rick turned, his expression shifting from anger to mild surprise before a smug grin spread across his face. $25. You got it?" Liam nodded, pulling out his hard-earned cash. As he handed it over, Margaret broke into quiet sobs. "Oh, dear boy, she whispered through tears, her voice quivering. "You didn't have to do that. We didn't mean to cause trouble." "It's okay, ma'am," Liam said gently, his heart aching at her gratitude. "Everything's gonna be all right." Rick snatched the money with a grunt and walked away, muttering under his breath. The other diners began to murmur, some offering Liam approving nods, while others turned back to their meals, eager to avoid further involvement. William reached out a trembling hand to Liam. "Thank you, son. We'll never forget this kindness." Liam helped them gather their things and escorted them out of the diner. As they stepped into the cool night, Margaret leaned on Liam for support, her frailty reminding him of Grace. The couple insisted they lived nearby, and though his stomach churned with hunger and his savings for Grace's meal were gone, Liam walked them home. Their modest apartment mirrored his own, small, worn, but filled with traces of love and resilience. When Liam finally returned home, Grace noticed the empty hands and tired expression. He recounted the night's events, his voice heavy with the weight of sacrifice. Grace, though saddened by the missed opportunity for her meal, placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You've always had such a good heart," she said with a bittersweet smile. "It was the right thing to do." Liam sat by her side, the gnawing hunger in his belly overshadowed by the warmth in his heart. As the night deepened, he stared out of the window, wondering if he had made the right choice. He didn't know that this small act of kindness was about to set in motion events that would change his life forever. The bell above the diner door jangled weakly as it swung shut behind Liam, but its faint chime was no match for the storm of tension that gripped the room. The air inside felt heavy, oppressive, as though the very walls of Rick's diner bore witness to the injustice unfolding. Liam stood frozen for a moment, his tired body weighed down not only by the aches of his labor, but also by the burden of choice that suddenly loomed over him. Before him, the elderly couple cowered like fragile saplings in a hurricane, their stooped shoulders quaking under Rick's relentless tirade. The man, William, clutched a napkin with trembling fingers as if it were a shield, while Margaret's face was a portrait of humiliation, her watery eyes fixed on the grimy linoleum floor. Around them, the other diners were an indifferent audience. Some whispered to one another, their eyes darting nervously, while others stared at their plates, deliberately ignoring the scene, as though the couple's shame might somehow contaminate their meals. Rick's voice cut through the silence like the crack of a whip. "Ha! You think I run this place for free? You come in here, eat, and can't even pay your bill? This ain't a soup kitchen." His words were laced with venom, each syllable a lash meant to strip the couple of their dignity. Liam felt a pang in his chest, sharp as a shard of glass. The couple's despair mirrored a truth he knew all too well, the quiet agony of scraping by, of swallowing pride because survival demanded it. He knew what it was like to choose between heat and food, between hope and reality. And yet, he hesitated. In his pocket, the crumpled bills seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. They were more than money. They were Grace's meal, a fleeting chance to ease her pain, even if only for a night. But as he glanced back at William and Margaret, their plight seemed to scream, louder than his own. They looked like two fragile birds trapped in a cage of humiliation, their wings clipped by a world that had turned its back on them. Rick wasn't done. He grabbed a half-empty bowl of soup from the counter and with a sneer, hurled it toward the couple. The lukewarm broth splattered across Margaret's dress, the once muted floral print now marred by streaks of brown. A gasp rippled through the room, but no one moved. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that lays bare the ugliest truths of human apathy. "Get out," Rick growled, his face contorted with rage, "and don't come back unless you've got money." The old man's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. Margaret wiped at her dress with a shaking hand, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Liam's stomach churned. It wasn't just anger he felt. It was disgust. Not just at Rick, but at himself, at everyone in the diner who sat by and let this happen. The faces around him blurred into a sea of indifference. Their silence a testament to a society too busy or too selfish to care. In that moment, Liam felt as if he were standing at a precipice, a great chasm of risk and uncertainty stretching out before him. He could step back into the safety of his own struggles, or he could leap into the unknown, driven only by the fragile hope that doing the right thing still mattered. "I'll pay their bill." The words left his mouth before he fully registered them, a spark igniting in the void where his hesitation had been. Heads turned, eyes wide with surprise, and perhaps a flicker of shame. Rick's gaze snapped to Liam, his expression shifting from fury to cold calculation. "You? A construction grunt? You got $25 to spare?" Rick's words were a knife, probing for weakness. Liam swallowed hard, his throat dry. He pulled the crumpled bills from his pocket and placed them on the counter. "How much?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new information. 25. Rick smirked as he counted the money, his triumph evident. "You'd better not be short." Liam didn't flinch. He handed over the bills and turned back to William and Margaret, who were staring at him as if he were some ghostly apparition. Margaret's lips quivered as she reached out to him. You didn't have to," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We didn't mean—" "It's okay, ma'am," Liam said softly, his own voice tinged with a mix of resolve and vulnerability. "No one deserves to be treated like that." The couple's gratitude poured out in a flood of shaky words, but Liam waved it away. He bent to pick up their scattered belongings, each movement deliberate, as if anchoring himself to the act of kindness to keep from drowning in regret. The money was gone, and with it the meal he dreamed of bringing home to Grace. But as he helped the couple to their feet, he felt a quiet clarity take root. When they stepped out into the cool night air, the weight in Liam's chest lifted slightly, replaced by a strange, fragile lightness. The streets were damp from an earlier rain, the glow of the streetlights reflecting in the puddles like fractured stars. Margaret clung to his arm as they walked, her frailty reminding him of his mother. They led him to a modest apartment building, its bricks worn and ivy-covered, a stark contrast to the garish neon of Rick's diner. As they climbed the creaking stairs, William began to speak, his voice hesitant but filled with a need to unburden. "Thank you, son," he said, pausing to catch his breath. We don't have much. Our children, they don't visit anymore. Said we're a burden." Margaret nodded, her gaze distant. "We never wanted to trouble anyone, but these days, everything's so expensive. Sometimes we have to choose between the lights and a meal." Liam's heart twisted at their words. Their pain was a reflection of his own, a mirror held up to the quiet desperation that defined so many lives. "I get it," he said, after a moment. "My mom, she's sick. The doctor says she needs treatment, but we can't afford it. So I just keep working, hoping something will change." By the time they reached the couple's door, a connection had formed between them, a fragile thread spun from shared struggles and unspoken understanding. Margaret pressed a small tin of cookies into Liam's hands, her eyes shining with gratitude. "For your mother," she said. "It's not much, but it's more than enough," Liam replied, his throat tight. As he made his way home, The streets felt emptier, the weight of his sacrifice settling over him like a second skin. When he entered the house, Grace's smile faltered as she noticed his empty hands. But when he told her what had happened, her expression softened into one of quiet pride. "You've always had such a good heart," she said, brushing a hand over his hair. It was the right thing to do. Liam nodded, but his mind lingered on Rick's sneer, on the indifference of the diners, on the cruel choice he'd been forced to make. His hunger gnawed at him, a reminder of what he'd given up. Yet, as he lay awake that night, he couldn't shake the image of William and Margaret's tearful gratitude. It was a small victory in a world that often seemed devoid of kindness, but it was a victory nonetheless. Little did he know the ripples of his act of compassion were already spreading, setting in motion a chain of events that would soon change his life forever. The morning light crept through the thin curtains of Liam's small bedroom, casting faint golden streaks across the worn floorboards. He stirred awake, his body aching from the demands of construction work, but his mind replayed the events of the night before. The faces of William and Margaret hovered in his thoughts, the gratitude in their trembling voices, the shame etched into their weathered expressions, and the tears that fell as freely as rain. The tin of cookies Margaret had given him sat untouched on the table. Grace had insisted he keep them for himself, but even the sight of them twisted his stomach with guilt. He hadn't been able to bring her the meal he'd promised. Yet when he had recounted the story of the diner, her eyes shone with quiet pride. "Kindness isn't wasted, Liam," she had said softly, her frail hands clasping his. "It grows. It finds its way back to you." But Liam wasn't so sure. The world he knew didn't reward kindness, it devoured it. His job site was a harsh realm of sweat and shouts, where exhaustion was currency and compassion was a luxury no one could afford. Rick's diner was no different, its greasy counters and flickering neon sign a stage for cruelty masked as pragmatism. Yet, amidst this harsh reality, Liam clung to a faint hope, a belief that small acts of goodness could still matter. As he readied himself for work, the weight of his sacrifice from the night before pressed heavily on his shoulders. His boots felt heavier, his stride slower as he walked the familiar path to the site. The hum of machinery greeted him, a discordant symphony of drills and hammers, but today, even the noise couldn't drown out the gnawing ache in his chest, a mix of doubt and longing. The day dragged on, the hours blurring together in a haze of labor and sweat. When the shift finally ended, Liam pocketed his modest pay and began the long walk home. His thoughts wandered to Grace, as they always did. He had promised himself he would save more for her treatment, but the tin of cookies in his kitchen was a stark reminder of how little he could offer. As he turned a corner, he saw a familiar sight that brought him to a stop. There, under the dim glow of a street lamp, stood William and Margaret. They were hunched over a burlap sack, its contents spilling onto the sidewalk. Potatoes, a few cans of soup, and a loaf of bread. Margaret struggled to lift it, her frail arms trembling under its weight, while William leaned heavily on his cane. Liam didn't hesitate. "Let me help you with that," he called out, striding toward them. "Oh, Liam," Margaret exclaimed, her face lighting up with relief. "We didn't mean to trouble you." "It's no trouble," Liam replied, lifting the sack as though it weighed nothing. The burden on his shoulders seemed to lighten as he carried it, even as his heart ached at their predicament. As they walked, Liam learned more about their story. Once, William had been a teacher, and Margaret a seamstress. They had raised 2 children, but life had taken its toll. Estranged from their children, who visited only when they needed money, the couple had been left to fend for themselves. Margaret sighed deeply. "We thought we had taught them better," she said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But money changes people." Liam nodded, the weight of her words settling over him like a cloud. "I know what it's like to feel stuck," he said after a pause. "My mom's been sick for a while. The doctor says she needs treatment, but we can't afford it. I work every day hoping something will change." Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You're a good boy, Liam. Your mother must be so proud of you." When they reached the couple's apartment, Liam set the sack down and prepared to leave, but Margaret insisted he stay for tea. He hesitated, thinking of Grace waiting at home, but the warmth in their eyes was impossible to refuse. The inside of their apartment was small but tidy, filled with reminders of a life once vibrant. Faded photographs lined the walls, their edges curling with age. One picture caught Liam's eye. A younger William and Margaret standing between two children, their smiles radiant. It was a stark contrast to the emptiness he had seen in their faces the night before. "Those were better times," William said, noticing Liam's gaze. "Before the arguments, before we were forgotten." Margaret poured tea into mismatched cups, her hands steady despite her frailty. "We've learned to make do," she said, handing Liam a cup. "But it gets harder every year." As Liam sipped the tea, his heart ached with empathy. Their struggles mirrored his own, yet their resilience shone like a flickering flame in the darkness. It was a stark contrast to the indifference he had seen at the diner, a reminder that kindness could endure even in the harshest of circumstances. When Liam finally returned home, Grace was waiting by the window as always. She listened intently as he recounted the evening, her expression softening with a mix of sadness and pride. "You're carrying a heavy load, my boy," she said gently. "But your kindness, it will come back to you. I know it." Liam smiled faintly, her words a fragile thread of hope he held onto as he drifted to sleep that night. The next day, as Liam walked home from work, he noticed something unusual. A sleek black car was parked outside his house, its polished surface gleaming under the fading sunlight. His steps quickened, a mix of curiosity and unease rising in his chest. As he approached, the car door opened and William stepped out, his posture straighter than Liam had ever seen. Beside him stood Margaret, her usual worn clothes replaced by an elegant coat. Their faces glowed with a warmth Liam couldn't quite place. "Liam," William began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "we need to talk." Before Liam could respond, Margaret stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. "We haven't been entirely honest with you," she said. "There's something you need to know." Liam's brow furrowed in confusion, but he nodded, gesturing for them to come inside. Grace, ever the gracious host despite her frailty, offered them seats at their modest kitchen table. Margaret took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "We told you our children abandoned us, and that's true. But what we didn't tell you is that we have means, more than we let on." William nodded. "We've spent years trying to find people who truly understand kindness, who live it, even when it costs them everything. And Liam, you've shown us something rare, something we thought we'd lost faith in." Liam stared at them, his mind reeling. "I don't understand," he said finally. Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope, placing it gently on the table. "Inside are the funds for your mother's treatment, and if you're willing, we'd like to sponsor your education." Liam's breath caught, his heart pounding in his chest. I don't know what to say." "Share this video if you think someone needs to know about this, too." William smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Say you'll take the chance, Liam. You've earned it." Tears welled in Liam's eyes as he glanced at Grace, who nodded, her own eyes shimmering with emotion. In that moment, the weight of his struggles began to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope that burned brighter than ever before. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like there was light at the end of it. The world outside Liam's window seemed to hum with life, but within the modest home he shared with Grace, the air was charged with something deeper, a crossroads of fate that bound him to William and Margaret in ways he never imagined. Their offer had seemed too grand, too otherworldly for someone like him, a construction worker scraping by. Yet, as he held the envelope containing the promise of his mother's recovery and his own education, Liam felt the gravity of their faith in him settle on his shoulders like a weight both heavy and transformative. But hope rarely comes without resistance. The first sign of trouble came the following morning when the polished black car appeared again outside their home. Not with William and Margaret, but with strangers. Two men in suits, their faces stern and their intentions clear, stepped out. Liam's pulse quickened as they approached, their polished shoes crunching against the gravel like an omen. "Are you Liam?" one of them asked, his voice clipped and cold. "Yes," Liam replied cautiously, stepping forward. "We're here on behalf of William and Margaret," the man said, his tone betraying a lack of warmth. "Their children have filed a formal complaint, accusing you of manipulation." The words hit Liam like a blow to the chest. "Manipulation?" he repeated, incredulous. "I haven't—" The second man interrupted. "Their children claim you've coerced William and Margaret into providing you with financial support. They're demanding a review of all recent financial transactions." Liam's vision blurred as anger and disbelief surged through him. Manipulation? Coercion? The very idea was so absurd it bordered on cruel. Yet, as the men handed him a letter bearing the legal seal of a law firm, reality set in. William and Margaret's children, the same ones who had abandoned their parents, were now clawing back for control, fueled not by love, but by greed. Liam stood frozen as the men left, the letter trembling in his hands. Inside the house, Grace noticed his pale face and beckoned him to sit. He explained the situation, his voice shaky and his hands clenching the paper as if it might crumble under the weight of his fury. "It's not right," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "They ignored their parents for years, and now that someone else cares, they want to take it all away." Grace placed a hand on his arm, her touch steady despite her frailty. "Sometimes, doing the right thing means facing those who don't understand it," she said softly. "But Liam, you've done nothing wrong. Truth has a way of shining through." Her words were a balm, but they couldn't extinguish the fire building within him. That evening, Liam walked to William and Margaret's home, the streets seeming darker than usual, as though the world itself mirrored the storm inside him. When he arrived, he found Margaret in tears and William pacing, his cane tapping against the floor in a rhythm of frustration. "They're threatening to freeze our accounts," William said, his voice laced with both anger and sorrow. "They've never cared about us, Liam. Not until now." Margaret wiped her tears, her frail hands shaking. "We're so sorry you've been dragged into this," she said, her voice breaking. "We never wanted to burden you." "You haven't burdened me," Liam said firmly, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning within him. "You've given me hope, and I won't let them take that away." The following days were a blur of tension and preparation. William's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Carter, assured them that the case against Liam was baseless, but the legal battle was only part of the war. The children, emboldened by their lawyers, began to spread rumors. Whispers of Liam's supposed manipulation reached the diner, the construction site, and even the small neighborhood he and Grace called home. Liam felt the sting of their words like daggers. People who had once nodded kindly now avoided his gaze. Rick, ever eager to exploit weakness, made snide remarks whenever Liam passed by the diner. "Taking advantage of old folks now, huh?" Rick sneered one evening as Liam walked by. "Guess that's easier than real work." The words ignited a fire in Liam's chest, but he kept walking, his fists clenched and his heart heavy. He couldn't afford to let anger consume him, not when there was so much at stake. The courtroom was stark and sterile, its walls lined with the weight of justice and its failings. Liam sat at a table beside Ms. Carter, his heart pounding, as William and Margaret's children, dressed in expensive suits that seemed to amplify their smugness, laid out their case. They spoke of manipulation, of betrayal, painting Liam as a predator who had preyed on their parents' kindness. Liam's hands tightened into fists under the table as he listened. Every word was a lie, a distortion meant to cast shadows over the truth. But then, Margaret took the stand. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of a lifetime of love and sacrifice. She spoke of Liam's selflessness, of the night at the diner when he had stepped forward to help them without a second thought. She described his struggles, his devotion to grace, and the kindness that had brought light to their darkest days. "Didn't ask for anything," Margaret said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We offered because he reminded us of what we'd forgotten, that there are still good people in this world." Her words hung in the air like a beacon, cutting through the fog of greed and lies. When William took the stand, his voice was equally powerful, though laced with the quiet anger of a man who had been wronged. "My children abandoned us," he said, his gaze piercing as it swept across the courtroom. Liam stepped in when they wouldn't, and now they want to take from him what they never cared to give. By the time the trial ended, the truth had pierced through the shadows. The judge ruled in favor of William and Margaret, dismissing the accusations against Liam and granting them full control over their finances. The children, their smugness shattered, left the courtroom in a huff, their muttered protests falling on deaf ears. As Liam stepped outside, the weight on his chest finally lifted. Margaret embraced him, her tears warm against his shoulder, and William clapped a hand on his back. "You've shown us more courage than anyone we've ever known," William said, his voice filled with pride. "We owe you more than we can ever repay." Liam shook his head, his own tears threatening to fall. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Ah, you've already given me more than I could have ever asked for." That evening, as Liam sat beside Grace in their small kitchen, the black car pulled up once again. This time it brought not conflict, but hope. William and Margaret stepped out, their faces alight with gratitude. Margaret handed Liam an envelope, not just with the funds for Grace's treatment, but with documents enrolling him in a prestigious trade school. "Take it, Liam," William said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've earned this." Liam's hands trembled as he accepted the envelope. He glanced at Grace, whose smile was radiant despite her frailty. For the first time in years, the future felt bright, not just for him, but for the people who had become family. And though the road ahead would still hold challenges, Liam knew one thing for certain: kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. The courtroom's echoes had barely faded when the world outside seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Liam stepped out into the crisp evening air, the glow of the setting sun casting a warm light over the courthouse steps. William and Margaret stood beside him, their faces a portrait of quiet triumph. Though the battle had left them shaken, they wore their victory like a well-earned badge of honor. For Liam, the end of the trial brought a strange mix of exhaustion and renewal. The accusations, the whispered rumors, and the weight of public scrutiny had tested him in ways he hadn't imagined. Yet, standing there with William and Margaret, two people who had trusted him when the world doubted, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their unwavering support had reminded him of the simple but powerful truth. Love and kindness could endure even in the face of greed and betrayal. Margaret reached out, her frail fingers brushing Liam's arm. "You've given us more than you'll ever know," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "This victory isn't just ours, it's yours too." William nodded, his gaze steady. "We can finally live without fear thanks to you." Their words warmed Liam's heart, but as he walked home that night, the weight of everything lingered. The memories of Margaret's trembling voice in the courtroom, the cold stares of her children, and Rick's sneering insults, all swirled in his mind like storm clouds refusing to dissipate. Yet amidst the chaos of those thoughts, one memory stood out: Grace's quiet smile and her unwavering belief that kindness could change the world. The transformation in Liam's life began almost immediately. The funds William and Margaret had provided for Grace's treatment meant she could finally receive the care she desperately needed. Liam stood by her side at the clinic, holding her hand as the doctors assured them that her condition, while serious, was treatable. The relief that washed over him was almost overwhelming, like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. Back at their modest home, changes began to take shape. The peeling paint on the walls was soon replaced with a fresh coat. The creaking floorboards were repaired, and for the first time in years, Grace's laughter echoed through the house. Liam noticed how her once wary eyes now sparkled with hope, and the sight filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known he needed. But the changes weren't just physical. The bond between Liam and Grace deepened, forged through years of struggle and sacrifice. Grace often reminded him that their good fortune was not a gift to be hoarded, but a responsibility to be shared. "Kindness is like a flame, Liam," she said one evening, her voice steady despite her frailty. "It only grows stronger when you pass it on." As weeks turned into months, Liam began his journey at the trade school William had arranged for him. The campus was a world unlike any Liam had known. Its polished hallways and state-of-the-art equipment, a stark contrast to the dusty construction sites he had grown accustomed to. At first, he felt out of place, a laborer among scholars, but with every passing day, he grew more confident, his calloused hands learning to wield precision tools with the same skill he had once used to lift heavy beams. The lessons weren't always easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that he didn't belong, that his place was back on the job site. But then he would remember Margaret's tearful gratitude or William's steady reassurance, and he would press on. Each success, every completed project, every passing grade felt like a step closer to honoring the faith they had placed in him. William and Margaret became more than benefactors, they became family. Sunday evenings were often spent at their home, where Liam and Grace joined them for dinners filled with laughter and stories. The once faded photographs of their children remained on the walls, a quiet reminder of the pain they had endured, but they no longer dominated the room's atmosphere. Instead, the warmth of shared meals and shared lives filled the space with a sense of belonging. One evening, as Liam helped Margaret sort through old papers, he stumbled upon a photo album tucked away in the corner of a cabinet. Its leather cover was worn, the edges frayed, but inside were memories of a life rich with love and resilience. Margaret hesitated as Liam opened it, her fingers trembling as she traced the faces of her children. "They were so full of promise," she said softly, her voice tinged with both sorrow and longing. But somewhere along the way, they lost themselves to greed. Liam glanced at the photos, the smiling faces frozen in time. It was hard to reconcile the joyful children in the pictures with the cold, calculating adults who had tried to tear their family apart. Yet, as Margaret spoke, he realized that her love for them had never wavered, even in the face of betrayal. "They may never change," Margaret continued, her gaze distant, I've made my peace with that. What matters is the love we choose to give, not the love we receive." Her words stayed with Liam long after he left that evening. They were a reminder of the stark contrast between selfishness and selflessness, between the love that demands and the love that gives, without expectation. Margaret's quiet strength and unwavering compassion were a beacon, guiding Liam as he navigated the new opportunities unfolding before him. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning when William called Liam to meet him at their company's headquarters. The towering glass building was a testament to the legacy William had built, a legacy now entrusted to Liam. Inside, the air buzzed with energy as employees bustled about, their movements precise and purposeful. William led Liam to the top floor, where the company's boardroom overlooked the city skyline. As they stood by the window, William placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "This company isn't just about profits," William said, his voice firm. "It's about people, about using what we have to make the world better. I trust you to carry that forward." Liam's throat tightened as he nodded. The weight of responsibility was immense, but so was the honor. In that moment, he vowed to uphold the values William and Margaret had instilled in him. As the months passed, Liam began to reshape the company, prioritizing ethical practices and charitable initiatives. Scholarships were established for underprivileged students, and partnerships with local organizations brought resources to struggling communities. Each decision was a reflection of the kindness Liam had received and a testament to his commitment to paying it forward. But Liam's greatest achievement wasn't the company's success. It was the legacy of love and compassion he helped build. Margaret, now widowed after William's peaceful passing, found solace in the family they had created together. Liam became the son she had always hoped for, and Grace, thriving in her newfound health, became the sister she never had. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Margaret raised her glass, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "To kindness," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "To the love that transforms and the courage that carries it forward." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, as the glasses clinked together and laughter filled the air, Liam felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The struggles, the sacrifices, and the pain had all led to this, a life rich with purpose and love. And as he looked around the table at the faces of those he held dear, Liam knew that the flame of kindness would continue to burn brightly, lighting the way for generations to come. Years later, the streets Liam once walked with weary steps seemed like a distant memory, yet they were etched deeply into the fabric of his story. The quiet, selfless act of kindness at Rick's Diner had cascaded into a life he could never have imagined, a life defined not by wealth or recognition, but by purpose and impact. The company Liam inherited from William thrived under his leadership, not because it chased profits with reckless ambition, but because it became a beacon of integrity and humanity in a world often dominated by greed. Programs for the underprivileged, scholarships for students, and initiatives for sustainable development were now the company's hallmarks. Liam ensured that every decision aligned with the values he had learned from Grace, William, and Margaret, the enduring belief that kindness was the strongest force for change. Margaret's health had begun to decline, her years catching up to her, but she remained vibrant in spirit. Liam often visited her, bringing Grace along to sit by her side. Their laughter would fill Margaret's small but cozy home, and Liam could see how their bond gave her strength. Despite the estrangement from her children, Margaret found solace in the family she had created. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves blanketed the ground outside her window, Margaret called Liam to her bedside. Her once strong voice had grown soft, but her words carried the weight of her years. "You've made me proud, Liam," she said, her hand resting lightly on his. You've done more for me and William than we could ever repay." Liam shook his head, his throat tight. "You've already given me everything," he replied, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "You believed in me when no one else did. You taught me that kindness isn't a weakness, it's a strength." Margaret smiled faintly. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "Keep believing in it. No matter how hard the world gets, no matter how many people doubt you, be the light for someone else, just like you've been for me." Liam promised, his heart heavy yet filled with resolve. When Margaret passed peacefully that evening, her legacy became another flame in the fire of Liam's purpose. She had lived her life with love and resilience, and Liam vowed to carry her memory forward. In the years that followed, Liam's life flourished, but he never forgot where he had come from. He continued to lead the company with compassion, growing its reach and deepening its impact. He expanded the scholarship program, naming it after Margaret and William. For every student who walked across the graduation stage, Liam saw a reflection of his own journey, a life changed by a simple act of generosity. Grace, too, thrived in her later years. Freed from the burden of illness, she dedicated her days to helping others, often volunteering at community centers and mentoring young people. Her resilience inspired Liam, and together they built a life centered on giving back. Rick's Diner, the place where everything had begun, was eventually sold. The new owner transformed it into a community eatery that offered free meals to those in need. Liam occasionally visited, sitting at a corner table with Grace, reflecting on how far they had come. The memories of that fateful night, when the air had been thick with tension and humiliation, now felt like echoes from another life. One evening, Liam stood at the edge of the city park, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. A group of children played nearby, their laughter ringing out like music. In his hand, he held a small tin of cookies, Margaret's last gift to him, now a cherished keepsake. It reminded him of the threads that connected their lives, the fragile yet unbreakable bonds formed by love and sacrifice. "Dad?" a small voice called behind him. Liam turned to see a young boy running toward him, his face alight with excitement. Behind him, Grace walked slowly, her cane tapping gently against the cobblestones. The boy reached Liam and tugged at his hand, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. "Can you help me with my project?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Liam smiled, crouching down to meet his son's gaze. "Of course," he said, taking the paper. "Let's see what you've got here." As they walked home together, the boy chattering excitedly, Liam felt a sense of completeness. The struggles, the sacrifices, and the pain had all led to this, a life filled with love, hope, and meaning. And though Margaret and William were no longer there to see it, their legacy lived on in every act of kindness, every life touched by their generosity. Liam's story became one of quiet renown in the community. People spoke of the man who turned his own hardship into a beacon for others, the leader who refused to let greed overshadow compassion. But for Liam, the greatest reward was knowing that his actions, however small they had seemed at the time, had rippled outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't always see. One day, as he stood in the company's headquarters, now bustling with energy and purpose, Liam looked out at the city below. The skyscrapers and bustling streets were a testament to progress, but they also reminded him of the countless people still struggling, still waiting for a helping hand. And so he vowed to continue, fueled not by the need for recognition, but by the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could create waves of change. As the years rolled on, Liam's name became synonymous with generosity and integrity. Yet to him, the most important part of his story wasn't the accolades or the success. It was the memory of a young construction worker stepping forward in a dimly lit diner, offering everything he had to help two strangers. That moment, born of selflessness and courage, had shaped not only his life, but the lives of countless others. And so, Liam's journey ended where it had begun, with a simple truth. Kindness is the legacy that never fades, the light that continues to shine long after we're gone.